So we are aware that during longer bouts of sexual abstinence, your pelvic floor recoups a certain amount of tone, strength, and pressure. Now, there are two significant factors here at play. The more obvious one being that you're not taxing your pelvic floor in the same ways that you are when you're chronically PMOing, and those muscles finally get an opportunity to recover from that chronic PMO. And the other is you're recouping a lot more of the prostatic fluid. Now, this is the kind of pressurized feeling you experienced after a period of abstinence. And this is significant for the cranial sacral pump and the circulation of cerebral spinal fluid via your breath. Now, before I explain this, there is a theory I am working on, for lack of a better word, that I would propose to you why I believe abstinence specifically could accelerate the benefits beyond the, let's say, just the increase of the strength of the pelvic floor and the pressure in the pelvic floor. So there are similar compositions in both prostatic and cerebral spinal fluid, specifically the presence of something called beta trace protein. Now, this part is scientific, research has shown that the beta trace protein has been found in both the CSF and also present in seminal fluid, which includes, of course, the prostatic fluid. Though the concentration of this protein is lower in semen than it is in the CSF, it does suggest that there is a relationship between these fluids. Now, there are many different functions of this beta protein, like nitric oxide regulation, like sleep induction, and the improvement of the blood-brain barrier function, to name a few. My point is that I would never feel embarrassed to say that if there existed an abundance or even an absence of prostatic fluid in the body, there would be a consequence in the function of the CSF. And it's not just beta trace protein, by the way, because they share certain other proteins, they share enzymes, and also more recently there was a study that identified a prostatic specific antigen that was also in the CSF. So long story short, I am of the opinion that sexual licentiousness, or simply an absence of sexual biological material in the human body, would have a consequence on the functioning of the CSF. Now, let's imagine the casing in which your brain and spinal cord sit, and this is well insulated with the cerebral spinal fluid. The pelvic floor is nice and pressurized and has a good tone. Now, it's far easier to cycle the CSF around the brain because, again, there's more insulation and there's more pressure from below. What we're essentially doing is flushing the brain with the compositions of the CSF, which are the proteins, the minerals, the salts, the ions, all for the benefit of the human experience. So rationality, I mean, we've kind of talked about the rationality, but Joseph, what's the point? What's the point in all this minutia? My response is, where do you want to start? We are fundamentally talking about the main human operating system, your very brain and spinal cord operating at its maximum capacity, and every other thing it innovates. So, where do you want to start? Improved cognition? Yes. Improved immune system? Yes. Improved endocrine profile? Sure. It makes logical sense that everything subsequently will be improved. So, neural conduction, improved recovery. We already talked about cognition. Take your pick. There's too much to actually put in this video. So again, if you want me to dedicate something specific to that, just let me know in the comments below. Now, the main mechanisms behind the modality of the CSF is something called the cranial sacral pump. I think I prefaced that at the start, so some of you might be wondering what this is. I think I've mentioned this before, but typically the phrase is often described in craniosacral therapy and osteopathic medicine, and essentially the word is used to describe the rhythmic movement of the CSF between the cranium and the sacrum, the base of the spine. So it's a pump which is driven by a very subtle but rhythmic expansion and contraction of the cranial bones and something called the dura mater, it's the tough membrane surrounding the brain and the spinal cord, plus the rocking motion of the sacrum, and it creates like a gentle pumping action that helps circulate the CSF through the nervous system. This does happen to a lesser degree when you're not consciously aware of it, such as your simple breathing. Like there's a very subtle thing that happens there. But what you can do to greatly enhance this particular phenomenon is something called spinal breathing, which increases the rate of CSF circulation up to 28% and even more in some studies. It does look very peculiar to view. I can give you a very, very brief demonstration, but imagine I will sit maybe cross-legged. All you're doing is you are extending the spine and also extending the head while breathing in as much as you can. And then you are exhaling while flexing the spine. So essentially what this is rocking the sacrum back and forth, and you're pumping the fluid up the spine, and it flushes the brain. Now, if I'm going to take a sidestep here into Vedantic vernacular here, the Vedas describe, and some of the holy books describe, 3 specific locks in the human body. They are Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, and Jala Bandha. And essentially what they describe in the scientific vernacular are diaphragms. So you have Uddiyana Bandha, which is the main diaphragm. Mula Bandha is the pelvic floor, and Jala Bandha is the throat lock. Essentially, and I kind of describe this in my breathing practices, but after we do a round of, let's say, a minute of spinal breathing, I will ask I was going to say delegates there, but let's say learners or individuals that are following me doing the breath work to contract the pelvic floor, to contract the diaphragm, and also to contract the throat. And what this does scientifically is, as you pushed all this CSF fluid up towards the cranium, you lock those parts. So it causes almost like a contraction and pressure against the CSF, and it squeezes. It's kind of you can imagine that the spinal cord is here. It squeezes at 3 points all the fluid up to the top of the head. And this creates what's called intracranial pressure, or intrathecal pressure is another word people have used to describe what I'm trying to describe to you. And what it does, it is essentially pressure in the head, and it compresses the fluid against the pineal gland, which creates a piezoelectrical effect, which is essentially a word used to describe an electric charge that happens under pressure. And certain crystals can do this. So the pineal gland is comprised of certain crystals, and when there's pressure via the CSF, this is where the spiritual connotations start to come into play. Periods of euphoria, precognition, some of the stuff that science and even myself are far behind using certain adept ways at describing to you. So there are some of the esoteric benefits there. But it was really interesting to me at the preface of this video to see the relationship on why sexual abstinence is fraught with so many both scientific and anecdotal benefits. And what I believe is a consequence of this is the relationship it also has with the CSF. We know breathing changes the brainwave from beta to alpha, so the benefits and the rationality for practicing something like regular breath work, if you're struggling with, let's say, mitigating sexual licentiousness and PMO and adult material, that has good bones there. But equally, I am now of the opinion that because we are moving and increasing the rate of the CSF circulation by north of 28% when we are doing spinal breathing, and the research is out with the sexual abstinence, but we know the pelvic floor is pressurized. Anybody that has done this kind of practice for a week will fundamentally tell you that yes, your pelvic floor has more pressure there. You can circulate this fluid maybe north of 40%. And what would be the effect there? I mean, there's more interesting golden nuggets here that I want to talk about in terms of the magnetic effect this has, because essentially this is a current that is going through you. There's additional language, or let's say cultures we should look at, such as Taoism. I'm more than convinced that scientifically what I've just described to you in the best way I can is the microcosmic orbit, which is an orbit that the Taoists believe qi flows through. I'll probably put something up on the screen so you can see here. They believe it comes through the meridians in the front of the face and down into the lower dantian, the solar plexus, pardon me. But I can see the relationship with the north-facing part of, the CSF. So it's, I mean, you can't say it's not interesting. That's what I will say here. Gentlemen, if you want a formal way to practice this, I've mentioned before, I think there's probably over like 5, 6, or maybe even 7 guided breathwork meditations that have come out that show you practically how to do this. And you can feel the effects yourself. I give away one every single Monday at 6 p.m. GMT. And I've got another I think 8 planned in advance. So you're well looked after in this regard. I would love to see you in there, and also some of the benefits that you're experiencing of regular breath work. Or you could find some free stuff if you don't want to support me. But if you do want to support me, I'd greatly appreciate it, gentlemen. And what do you think? Theories, facts? There's some theories, there's some facts in there. Speak soon, breathe soon. Take care.